This is Jeremy Park, CEO of City Current, personally inviting you to Growth Current. Growth Current is our e-learning and online personal development platform with City Current. It's an opportunity to attend virtual events with global thought leaders, national guest speakers, and experts who can help you grow personally and professionally. It gives you access to success secrets, lessons learned, learning modules, and so much more. Subscriptions are only $8 a month, and you can do bulk subscriptions for your team. Check out growthcurrent.co to learn more.
Welcome to the Changemakers Podcast, produced by City Current and brought to you by Lipscomb and Pitts Insurance. This show shares personal stories and insight from those who are giving back and making a difference so we can learn and do the same. We cover life lessons, business advice, passion, and purpose. Now here's our host, the CEO of City Current, Jeremy Park.
Welcome to the Changemakers Podcast, produced by City Current with sponsorship from Lipscomb and Pitts Insurance and Higginbotham. I'm your host, Jeremy Park, and on this episode, we're honored to have with us Dr. Deb Macfarlan Enright, the founder and CEO of the Macfarlan Group. She's doing so much good to power the good with social impact organizations, helping them become even more powerful disruptors to create more change and impact more lives around our nation and around our world. So we're honored to have her with us. We get to dive into this world of social impact organizations and becoming a catalyst to power the good. Let's start out. Deb, how are you doing?
Just great. Jeremy, I'm not sure I can live up to that introduction, but I'm glad it's recorded. So thank you so much for that.
You can use this wherever you go. This can be your intro in, but no, you're doing amazing good. And you also, we've had a chance to interview you for our radio show and just sharing a lot of your tips and recommendations, really helpful. And I think this will give us a longer form to do that. And so let's start with just getting to know you personally. Give us a little bit of just your backstory in terms of where you grew up and some of your childhood.
Oh, sure. So I am a product of Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., which was a great place to grow up. And I had parents who were always involved in the community. My father started a Saturday morning sports clinic that allowed kids really from marginalized communities to come in and have great coaching. It started with basketball tournaments, teaching basketball, doing basketball, and then he went and served hundreds of kids in a football league. And so that's always been around. My folks were always involved in Arlington. My mom helped a theater that started literally in the garage of someone's home, move now into a multi-million-dollar facility that has Stephen Sondheim writing plays for Eric. And she treated them like they were family. And they treated her like family too. So I've always seen that. And my brother, he was always involved in his community wherever he found himself. And so I've had really good models. Plus, it always takes a village. All of the parents, the teachers, and the community leaders that I grew up with, it was about service. And so it just was, I think it was just something that was bred in me from a variety of people.
So my background is a little similar in terms of just having very community-driven parents. At the time, like for me, I didn't realize how much of a difference, how much of an impact it made until really I got into college and beyond. And looking back, realizing, wow, okay, that really did shape me and my brother. Did you realize it as a child, like when you're going through and you're being a part of all the programs and kind of plugging in with your parents, did you realize, hey, wait a second, this is something that's a little different, but it's making an impression on me? Or is it something that later in life you look back and say, wow, that really made a difference in my life?
I really love the question. It's your normal, right? It's your normal to get up and make all these posters and make coffee and, be in the gym of your elementary school at odd hours and then have hundreds of people come through. That's your normal. I can say certainly, and the undergraduate school that I chose is about service and worldwide kind of disruption to make the world better. But I will also say that I think while as a child you see your parents, and even as a young adult you see your parents, I really think I have to say that it probably was the eulogy, which seems very, very late, but that's when you hear small snippets of impact that my dad and mom would never have shared. You just didn't do that, right? And that then you really like, oh, wow, this is why it feels so natural. This is why, oh, this is just what we do.
So what's a memory that stands out for you as kind of a special moment with your mom or dad or with your family as a whole?
Oh, wow. Gosh, let me see. That's so broad.
That's why I'm giving you a lot of bandwidth. You can go at whatever.
I was just going to say, wow. Gosh. I think there's a lot, right? So hear me when I say there's a lot. I think for me growing up as a young woman, in the time I grew up as a young woman, my mother was the first female chair of the board of trustees for our church. And she always worked hard. I've never seen anybody work harder. I mean, that was the days of Robert's Rules of Order and all that stuff. And she would practice. She'd practice with my dad. If she would write something, she'd just ask him to look at it. She just was so prepared. And not only because she wanted to do a good job, but she understood where she stood in that moment in the church's history. And I think that was something that, again, nobody lifted up like, look what she's doing. It was watching her take an opportunity and move it forward, not just for herself, but for those she was serving.
That's pretty cool in and of itself, is obviously what she was able to accomplish and stand for in the role model aspect, but at the same time too, also practicing at home and seeing like your mother and father working together for something that's so meaningful for her, realizing too that, you know, from your vantage point, it takes a lot of hard work and effort and practice to where you get it right in that moment. And so I think that's a pretty neat piece too, is you realize, wow, mom and dad don't just walk into this role prepared. They actually have to work for it to be able to be successful.
Yeah, that's really good, because up until that time, it was mostly just academics, right? Like prepare really well. We were in sports as well and fine art stuff, but you know, we saw ourselves preparing, and that was again part of your normal. But to watch, you're exactly right. To watch an adult get ready for something, and yeah, you're right, exactly. The depth of preparation, I really appreciate that. The depth of preparation, again, was to make sure she did the job well, but it was also because she knew she needed to truly make a statement. That being the first, that it was important to include that voice, that voice was prepared, knew what it was talking about. But I think she also opened the door so that others could be considered. And I don't think she ever would have necessarily taken that kind of credit, right? But just understanding that because she did good work, it mattered.
Is there any sort of advice, things that you take from your parents that you still obviously use with you today? So whether they're kind of like slogans, things that your parents would say over and over and over that would drive you crazy as a child, but yet now you're like, wow, I sound just like my mom or dad.
Yeah. Oh, there is that moment, right? And you're like, all at once you hear it, and then you kind of go, but then you kind of go, oh, that's right. It really does matter. I think for my dad, it was always to thine own self be true, always. And we heard that when we were very, very little. And I think from both of them, it was when an opportunity comes, first of all, don't screw it up, but also make sure that it's the opportunity that you want. And sometimes for achievers, that's particularly difficult, right? Because the bling can look really, really seductive. But then you just have to, and I certainly am still gaining that maturity. I don't have it yet in its fullness, but just being able to even back away from an opportunity if it just didn't fit, and whatever that metric would be. I think they both were that way, which really having that filter, seeing that filter, right? Not just hearing about it, but seeing the filter really was helpful.
Yeah, it's one thing to say it over and over, but to see it play out and how your parents have to make hard decisions and say, this one doesn't align. When you actually see it, it's like, okay, one, they're following their own advice, but two is that gives you the strength and confidence to make those same types of decisions later in life.
Yeah, and that's what you really hope you're passing on to your kids, right? So again, it's not about, oh, look what my parents did, or it's really what are the lessons from what they have done. And I think that's really important too.
At what point did you start going down the path of, I want to really be a disruptor, help nonprofits and social impact organizations? Talk a little about just career on your end and starting to kind of shape in that direction.
Sure. Well, I blame it all on Vassar College. We are a collective of 40,000 strong across the globe who are determined to make the world better. And I mean, I've had from extremely illustrious, iconic alums to best friends down the hall who showed me what it took to look at things differently and to consider things differently and see if there was an opportunity for change. And so I blame it all on them. I think for me, Jeremy, I've always been someone who's just been interested in what's the next adventure. I clearly would be on that alum panel, like you don't have to know what you're doing to get started. And I didn't have a clear trajectory. So I worked for the Alumni Association right after. So literally got the sheepskin, walked across, went to Alumni House and traveled, which was a great gig, traveled a bit for there. And when in my senior year, I produced an album, which kind of also served as my thesis, whatever. It's a great
We'll
place.
talk about that, the jazz.
We'll talk about that. But anyway, so then, so I got to work at the school, and then my band was still, not my band, the band I was a part of was still there. And then I just felt like I needed to graduate. It's just one of those things. So what came back down to DC and then just started gigging out and doing open mics and then realized that I liked it and I liked it a lot. And of course it was a good career. But then having gotten married and then having children, jazz and music is as jealous as a toddler, and my girls won. And I would never look back on that. But your mind does, and I'm not sure anybody else's does, but mine was turning to goo. And when I'm talking about, pee and all that stuff and burps and stuff. And so literally was looking for things to do just for some intellectual stimulation, right? Started a book club, was actually asked to leave. It's an interesting story. And so then I just started on, well, what else could I do? Started a master's program at UVA, which was just like food for the soul for me. It was in social foundations of education. Okay. Loved that. Loved reading and the writing and the discussion. We moved down here. I went over to Dr. Guthrie, who was the chair at Peabody in the LPO, Leadership, Policy, and Organizations, and just said, dude, can I just finish? I have a master's, I'm not done. Sure. Started there, and then they were very kind to take care of the bills for that, and then put me in the doctoral program. And boy, I can't thank him enough, but certainly all the people, all the colleagues in the cohort, just to be in their presence. I mean, these are just extraordinary people, and they were all bent on change. How do we make things better? I've always been involved with nonprofits. I've served on boards. I believe in that work very much. And it just seemed right to expend all of these gifts that had been poured into me, into the folks who do get up at 3 a.m. and like, how do I make the world better? And it's a great way to spend a part of your life.
So let's bounce back to two things you mentioned and unpack it a little bit. One is the jazz singer. So give us a little bit more of an elaboration on that, because you accomplished a lot on that side and did some really cool things. So give us a little bit of a teaser on the jazz singing career.
Okay, so started out, as any person who looks like me does, with a guitar and a campfire, right? And then you go to open mics and you're in dives, and that's so much fun. Probably favorite story, Jeremy, of the entire music. Well, there's actually two, but probably the favorite one is, you at some point you're schlepping all this stuff around and et cetera. And I always had the sound system, right? Because then I could just hire anybody to come along and they wouldn't have to bring a lot of equipment. And you know what that means with all the equipment you schlep. And I remember I had finished an original, and I just, you kind of strum down on the guitar, I finished the original, and the restaurant, of which I was the host for the open mic, just erupts, right? And I'm like, finally, right? And I look up, everybody's eyes are watching the TV, and somebody has just done a beautiful dunk on a basketball game.
Very humbling.
I was just like, okay, well, there we go. And then I think, but that was okay, right? That's just a great story. And you always remember that one. It's the one that I always bring up. For the jazz thing, I loved, and I think it also really hooks to the disruption piece. In jazz, there's 32 bars for a standard tune, right? And you have all these greats doing all these different things with, you can't take that away from me, right? And what I loved about that was within those 32 bars with the magicians that there was just incredibly musicians. I mean, I even had Peter Betts played some with me, who was the bass player for Ella Fitzgerald. I had the bass player for Tony Bennett. I mean, just because it was in DC, so I learned, right? But what I loved about what that improvisation would allow us to do, a gentleman that I worked with, he always would say, it's like a conversation. So I would bend time, and it allowed me to do that. I didn't have to stay on like a 6/8 time strumming. So I could bend time. I'd scare the bejeebers out of new guys who I'd be in the first gig. I would wait forever to start the tune, and you'd see them start to look around at the other guys like, did she forget? So it was always really fun. At the Kennedy Center, which was a really fun thing, I was in fact 9 months pregnant with my first daughter. And I was singing a blues tune, like he's done me wrong kind of stuff. And for some reason, and there's a portion of the tune I would hold very, very long, just a really long time. You've heard a lot of people do that, long time. And the guys knew it, so it wasn't going to be a surprise. All of a sudden, I look at my belly and there is something projecting, like her foot or something. And it took my air. So all of a sudden, my mouth is wide open, they're playing, and there's nothing coming out, and there's this foot or something extending. And you just go like, this is interesting. So I just turned around. I said, that kind of keep going stuff. And then, a hand came out with some water, and it all worked out fine. But so I wasn't the only one who was at the Kennedy Center. My eldest, Casey, was also at the Kennedy Center.
Those are also the little things that probably no one in the audience notices, but that becomes, to your point, a special moment with you and the band, because all the little things that are going on, and yet the show must go on and you continue on just like a pro. And it becomes a special memory that, no one in the audience even has any clue other than, wow, that was a great performance. But I tell you though, as a songwriter and as a performer, it gives you so much confidence as a storyteller. It also too, as a songwriter, it's a hard thing to learn at the first part, because opening up can be very intimidating. But when you do, and you start putting yourself out there, that's the very thing that endears you to an audience. And I think those are the things that later in life really help you form powerful relationships, connect with so many different people, give you charisma on stage. It really does shape, once again, looking back, it shapes you going forward in a powerful way for those experiences, which I think for what you do today really do help you galvanize, tell stories. I mean, there's so many things I think that really do come out of the lessons learned as a singer, songwriter, performer that you use today.
Jeremy, that was a beautiful segue. It's just simply practice. Thank you. Because you're spot on, right? So if so part of the gig, obviously, was setting up your set list for 4 hours. It's a long time, right? And you can have it so the guys have the charts in place, but you've got to also read the room. So if you're ready to do, let's say you're ready to do a bossa nova and you're really going to crush it, and the energy level's high, unless you know your crowd enough, you don't want to hit a ballad, although you may have had that on the list. This is very similar with any of the work that we do. So if when we're working with boards, or we're working with social impact organizations, the exec team, or even yesterday just talked with somebody who has an idea and wondering about collaborating or start a 501c3, it's reading that, right? So what are they ready for or not ready for? Because our work is to walk alongside. It's never to tell, it's to evoke what they already know, right? Those hunches we talked about before. And so how do we empower them to bring that forward? So as an educator, hats off to teachers. I mean, talk about a live gig for 9 months out of the year. That's an incredible workload for them, whether you're a kindergartner, especially if you're in high school, right? You constantly have to read your audience. So to your point, yeah, I do believe, not just in the presence sense, because my dad had me ready for show and tell with a proper memorized 3-minute talk in first grade every Friday. And it wasn't like my puppy Blue. It was the Statue of Liberty. It was the Berlin Wall. I mean, I have no idea. But I loved it, right? So I think I've been trained to do that from very, very little. But this notion, you do the same thing, even in this interview, you've got questions, but you're actively listening to see where you need to guide this. And that truly is a talent. You're very good at that. But I think having that ability or growing that ability is very helpful in helping clients be who they need to be in the moment.
Mention the getting kicked out of the book club. That's kind of the other piece that I wanted to come back to.
All right.
You can't throw that out there without at least elaborating on it a little.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. So great group of people. Let me just say that. But we were going to read a classic, and I probably. Well, anyway, when you're trained like I was as an undergraduate, you ask, some what you think are just legit questions like, what edition should we use? And they all went, what edition should we use? Are you kidding? Anyway, so because I just thought that's what you did. So when you discussed it, you're on the same page, whatever. I'm sure now your listeners are like, geez, who's next? Right? Is she almost done? So I had a gentle conversation with the other person who had started it. And she's, hey, could we go to coffee? This was like the next day. And then she said, you know what? I got to tell you, I think for most of us, it's really about the wine and talking about being a parent and I'm not sure this is going to be all that satisfying for you. I thought, boy, that was the kindest rejection I think I've ever received.
Well, hey, I mean, that's a fair thing. Like, we're just here for the wine, cheese, and stories. You're actually here to talk about the book.
Yeah, move on.
You're legitimately wanting a book club.
And so then I enrolled in the master's thing. So it all worked out. But it is kind of funny to have started something and then to have politely been asked to leave.
Hey, well, you're taking it serious. Hey, that's part of the craft of it. If you're going to do it right. So share for listeners about the Macfarlan Group. So talk about what you do, starting the company. Give us a little bit of that.
Yeah. So we believe that for those who are in the world of disruption and making the world better, that there are folks who can support what they're doing. We also believe that putting that business lens on what they do is what they do every day. Just nobody really tries to talk about that filter. So in those three lanes, right, strategic planning, leadership development, and operational efficiencies, we see those all kind of working together. So our work is to really have folks understand where they are operationally. And we don't talk about that, right? So, are the strategies in line? Are you implementing, and do the constituents really understand what the implementation is and what's the value add to them and then to all of us? How are you handling your money, from finances to forecasting and the wonderful fundraising? Does that align? And the HR piece. I mean, part of the work that we do, actually, before we even get to the strategic plan, is this kind of workplace culture. There's no greater way, besides the classroom, there's no greater place, and probably now in hospitals, and I'm not saying that wasn't true before, but particularly with the pandemic, there's no greater place for burnout than people who believe that they are purpose-driven, called to, need to make a difference. It's a different gear that they are even living in and using. And so this work-life balance is very hard. It can cause toxicity, not because anybody's like, man, I just want to make this workplace awful. It's just what happens. So we come in and look at those kind of 4 strategic points, and we use an algorithmic tool that I helped to design for the social impact space. And then we pour all this expertise and experience in, and we don't tell anybody what to do. We help to uncover what they are thinking needs to happen, or in fact may say, have you guys ever thought of, let's go down that path. And I think that's really kind of the sweet spot for us, is really thinking in a different, fresh way, bringing in some quantitative data beforehand. So we're not asking how many of you served, how many lives have you changed. We're just saying, so within the walls of operations, what's it look like? And we've had some of the greatest conversations, particularly during this this initial event that we do with people. It's really been fascinating. People are really, really super interesting. And doing this, using this tool certainly heightens the awareness and the engagement for boards, which we love.
On the radio show interview, I asked you some of the questions that you like to lead in with and kind of open up the door. What are you looking for? Success stories. So we cover a lot of ground there. So I will definitely encourage listeners to kind of go back and watch that interview, because I think that'll dive in a little bit deeper into this area. Share for this part, though, a little bit of just the magic on your end, because it can be tough sometimes, like you said, when you're working with a social impact organization, that's their babies, purpose-driven. They are in it to win it, 24/7, deeply committed. And while they recognize they need help, sometimes that can be a very intimidating process. And so to your point, making it fun, not telling them what to do, but galvanizing them around some ideas. Share a little bit just kind of how you're able to work through that, of not being critical in a negative way, at the same time winning their trust so that they can do what is necessary to move forward in sometimes a different direction.
Well, first, thank you for using social impact organization. You picked that up in the first interview, and I couldn't be more grateful. That's a great question. Gaining trust. I guess we'd have to ask the folks that we work with. I think we do approach our work with great humility. We do not even suggest we've got the answers. We have experience, expertise, and we have some quantitative tools that we use. But we really know that they know best. And so what we bring are opportunities for thinking. I mean, when we ask some pretty tough questions, like, what does it matter? Who's doing it better? Why aren't you filling a gap? What's the legacy? And finally, are you consciously working yourself out of a job? Not the executive director job, but if it's about hunger, what are you doing to solve it? If it's about homelessness, what are you doing to solve it? Which doesn't mean that the salve, which is could be the current delivery of mission, is not important. Of course it's important, but there's got to be a piece in what you're thinking about that's like, when can we close the doors? And I think those allow organizations to think more broadly, to understand that it's very easy to be so mission driven. It allows for creep, because you're like, well, we can do this too, we can do this too. But it lets them go, well, let's step back a second. We'll work with somebody actually tomorrow. And they're thinking about a shared services model where there would be one of the services kind of under the umbrella and what that looks like. Well, okay. So what does that mean? Is that a separate 501c3? Maybe, right? Or is it, does it become a piece of the budget of the larger organization? Or is it something you put and really work out the business plan for, understand what the funding needs to be in perpetuity, because this particular thing is not going to go away, and do you endow it? Those are just, I mean, when you're trying to make the world better, those are the last things you're going to have time to think about something. Of course you have the capacity. So we just try to like bring the neutrality in terms of eyes, and then really like, you guys are incredible. Let's push a little bit, and then we'll do whatever it takes to try to ground some of that either in data, anecdotal, or numbers quantitatively, and try to help them see like, yeah, that's a good road, or nope, don't want to go there.
This could be the same answer, but on the radio show, I asked you about success stories. For this, though, I'm going to ask you about satisfying stories. So what has been satisfying for you to see the impact of your efforts in terms of how they manifest through the work you do with the social impact organizations?
Oh, I love that question. Satisfying. I think the initial work we do with, it's really every client. I think the satisfying part is for them to, you watch them see the options unfold for them. You watch them understand that, and it's stuff they already knew, right? That maybe what they're doing should either be revised or rethought a little bit, or maybe they can move from finding funding to finding fit. So maybe it's not about adding one more thing. Maybe it's diving a little bit deeper. Maybe it's not trying to build something new. Maybe it's really leveraging what already exists. And boy, that's satisfying to see, right? It's also understanding that sometimes, Jeremy, and I know this has happened for you as well. You find that you've done a good amount of work, and then all of a sudden the client might move to another, like all of a sudden some of that's either forgotten, it's never dismissed, forgotten, because now there's a momentum and a role and all that stuff. And that needs to be celebrated. But also it kind of is your job to say, but we've done that. So unless we need to revisit it for a real reason, we're kind of going down a rabbit hole. And that can be tricky when people are working with their passion and now and you've opened up the thinking, right? But it also is satisfying that they're constantly trying to get better, right? And so I think that's, across all of them, I think that's pretty much the general thing, is just watching this. Oh, okay. Oh, I hadn't thought about it this way. Or really, I'm going to be careful how I've said it because I've never said it this way before, but complimenting them. I'm like, you guys have got this going on. You could match any for-profit or any startup with what you're thinking. So grasp it, take it, and move with it. This is the point of it, because you're running a business as it is. For some reason, we've got the wrong label. We're going to fix that, but you're doing just what a startup is doing. And so you need the business plan. It can't just be what's next. And then watching that happen, that's incredibly satisfying.
Well, and that goes back, like you said, the label we put on a nonprofit isn't fair. That's why you like to use social impact organization. And I think that's an important differentiator, is that they are operating like a business. They're held to the same, you do still have to be good stewards of your financial resources to be able to do everything that's necessary to fulfill the mission, but you're driving around social impact. And so social impact organization. What,
Jamie, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
So, and here's the thing that's really, really important for me, and it gets my backup. When somebody believes that somebody who's working in the nonprofit social impact space couldn't get a job in the real business world, I'm sorry. You've got somebody who doesn't clock in, clock out, isn't motivated by bonuses, isn't looking for territory. They're just trying to make the world better. And they've devised whole programs that are saving lives, and they couldn't make it. They could run circles around it. And that's why part of that nomenclature is so offensive to me. It's categorically unfair to think that people that are in the nonprofit world, well, they just couldn't make it. Seriously? Okay.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction, and that's something that when you look at the misperceptions out there, there's so many of them, and so battling through those unfortunate stereotypes, especially. How has this work changed you personally?
Love that. I think it is. First of all, it's given me huge encouragement about where we're moving, and I am absolutely categorically underscore in love with the emerging leaders. I love millennials and I love Zers. They're incredible because they're going to make it happen, right? They're absolutely going to make it happen. They are unabashed in how they want to make impact. They don't care if it's going to be comfortable. They don't care if we're going to like it. They're just going to make it happen. And that is so exhilarating, so that they can field these questions. What does it matter? What's the legacy? Are you working yourself out of a job? How can you disrupt what's going on? Because clearly it hasn't worked. So how do we make that better? And following their energy. I mean, I'm so lucky to be, I teach the certificate course at the Center for Nonprofit Management for Emerging Leaders. I learn more than they ever do. I love their challenge, how they challenge me. I love when they ask really tough questions. I also like it when they're like, yawn. I mean, we've had to do everything online, so you really have to talk about gigging out, right? And knowing your set list. I appreciate it. And I just know from the conversations that we have, they're it. And so anytime I can be in their energy span, I'll sit way off stage. Just let me have a little bit of the raise. It's a tremendous thing. It's tremendous.
What would your words of encouragement be for young professionals, for the emerging leaders, for those young leaders who are really stepping in and, like you said, focused on creating change? What would your words of encouragement or one bit of advice be?
Well, I don't have a sponsorship, but what I would say is just do it. So we fund through Vassar 2 summer internships, and this year we partnered with the Nashville Entrepreneur Center and with Persist Nashville. And so 2 Vassar students work with them for the summer. When COVID's over, hopefully they'll be able to be in Nashville. I've done it for 2 reasons. One, because it is a northern school for them to see what the South is like for those who haven't. It's not that we don't have Southern kids go to Vassar. We do. But it's also for highly capable students to understand what the social impact world looks like and see it as an industry they can enter. And can provide a living and can provide a fulfillment for the long term. And I think that's super important. So step into it and don't necessarily see it as a bridge before you get a real job, going back to the understanding of what that means, but see it as a powerful step in a very powerful industry that is only going to gain momentum because of how millennials and Zers see the world.
What would your words of encouragement or a bit of advice be for social impact organization leaders, so executive directors, CEOs, those of us who are a little older? What would your words of encouragement and advice be for us?
See yourself as the CEO of Alliance Bernstein. See yourself as the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and you have something up on them. You are determined to make the world better. They need you more than you need them. And so meet them as an equal. Don't go to them with an Oliver Twist cup. You don't deserve that, and they don't respect that. Don't let them use you. You meet them right where they need to meet you.
Give us one just fundraising tip or recommendation when it comes to that side, because obviously that is a very important piece of the equation. So what's one bit of advice or a tip on that side?
I would just say to really honor and understand who your donors are. So in the specific field of major gifts, I think still in the world of social impact, because fundraising is one of the larger challenges, we worry about being territorial. Don't take mine. I see a world where you can have an ecosystem-wide event. So if you're in reentry and recovery, what would it look like if there was a larger event that brought all those folks together? Mending Hearts, 413 Strong, Healing, Housing, Project Return, on and on and on, right? What would it look like if that all came together so that the ecosystem spoke to people who are already backers or to enlist new people into that? And then figure out the distribution of the money and make it equitable. But what would that look like? I'm convinced you're not going to lose anything. You're only going to gain more. And that collaborative spirit will actually make the whole thing much more healthy. That's a big ask. It's a big dream, but I know we can do that.
So we'll switch over here in a second. Last question, and then we'll switch over into our lightning round, which is just short questions, short answers. But what on your end, when you look at taking the lessons that you're learning every day with the Macfarlan Group and looking forward, give me one for just the general community, one bit of advice, one idea around becoming better catalysts for our community, taking an active role in making a difference in our community. What's one bit of advice on that side?
Remember what your talents are and use them. Figure out where you fit in to help an organization. And it's not just your checkbook.
Yeah. The physical engagement to me is so critical. My wife always laughs because I use the same analogy. She's like, here we go again. But it's so true, is that if you put a physical dollar bill on the table, it doesn't do anything. It just sits there. It doesn't mentor a child, teach a child, tutor. It doesn't physically solve any problems. People do. And so when you talk about creating change, we can throw all the money in the world at a system, but it just will go down the drain if people physically aren't involved with their leadership and their time, talents, and everything to be physically involved. And that's so important, is to be physically engaged in being a part of the solution and being the part of the change. So let's go ahead and switch over to our lightning round. So just short questions, short answers. But first one, what do you like to do to relax?
Oh, wow. Well, I love walking, and I love walking with my dog.
Nice. So are you a stay up late, work late, or wake up early? Where do you fall in the equation, or never sleep and just do it all?
So I'm a startup, and so you know the answer. It's C.
There you go. All hours, day or night, constantly going. So do you drink a lot of coffee, or what's your go-to?
It's really weird. I did this cleanse a couple of years ago. And I'll drink coffee, and I used to do that in school, like with an IV, right? Because I was getting my master's and doctorate when I had 2 little ones. But yeah, I don't do that as much now anymore. It's really just water or kind of anything that kind of just to hydrate. That's what you learn. And that's so good. It's not sexy at all. No, I love coffee. I love all the social enterprises in town that do coffee. But I no longer have an IV hooked up. That scab has healed.
Nice. So I know you like to read and take books very serious. What's a recent book you've read?
I have to say it's a novel that was so interesting. It's called The Midnight Library. And it has a person look through, it's a really quick read. It has a person who is about to end her life, go through the different decisions she's made through her life to bring her to her place. And then it kind of, at the end of the book, she's like, oh, so now I feel better about everything because I did have more choice. I love that as a metaphor for life, that where you might find yourself, if you just look back and see kind of where you've gone. Again, it's not a puritanical if you hadn't, it's more like, so I did make that decision on purpose. I just found that book so interesting. So The Midnight Library. And then in terms of kind of nonfiction, which of course I love, anything by Doris Kearns Goodwin, I truly, truly like that, or John Meacham. I mean, the Nashvilleian, wonderful, wonderful author. But both of them have this take on history that makes it read like a novel, and has a ton of leadership lessons throughout all of them. I started reading her when I was a freshman at Vassar, and I've never stopped. She's amazing.
What do you like to watch on TV?
I love sitcoms. And so I'm eating up the CNN history of sitcom, stuff that's going on. I love the repartee, right? And in fact, right now, God, it's terrible because I've got gray hair and it's going to feel like it. Anyway, I love the Golden Girls. Estelle Getty is hysterical. How she punches, I just love that. And so sometimes when I just need like a little break, I'll pop that on. I'll hear one of her lines and it's nirvana. I just love it.
When you have visitors into town, where do you like to take them? So you're in the Nashville area. So where do you like to take them?
It's interesting. So before the pandemic, we had a regional program that was coming from Vassar. So all people coming from around the world. And so we put this stuff together. It was when Chihuly was going to be at Cheekwood. His wife is a Vassar grad. And that was going to be great. Start there and then kind of move across town, right? And so I've got a lot of addresses that we had in that program. I think one of the places I absolutely love is Pinewood Social. I just love taking people to that place and saying, so would you like to go bowling? And then you walk, and they're like, oh my gosh, it really is an Elvis place, right? Then they go back and they see this vintage and like, this is the coolest thing ever, right? So I love Pinewood. I love the trolley barns. I mean, I have CNM and obviously with the EC. I do like the outskirts. Cheekwood is fantastic, but just driving through East Nashville. And of course, I do work with Mending Hearts. And so watching West Nashville, this renaissance happen, I mean, who doesn't want to show the Athena statue at Centennial Park? Come on, right? You walk in there and you just do one of those, right? So there's just so much rich stuff that can happen. The campuses are always great. Both Vandy, Belmont, and all of them are just wonderful. Yeah, for this to be a mid-sized market town, over the time that I've been here, it's just so eclectic in these different pockets. So yeah, it's almost like if a weekend's not enough, right? Not enough at all.
So where do you like to go out of town? Where are some go-to spots?
Yeah, so Outer Banks for sure, and then DC and New York, and the Mid-Hudson Valley up there.
what is a favorite, and it doesn't even have to be in town, but a favorite restaurant or spot you like to eat at?
Oh, geez. It always changes. Well, I'll go ahead and say Pinewood. I mean, they've got great food there. Yeah, I'll just do a plug for Pinewood. Yeah, sure.
They do. I've had many meals there. They do have, I've actually had days where I'll do a breakfast there for breakfast meeting, a lunch, and a dinner.
You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong. Ambiance food, they've got it all. And you can bowl. I mean, come on.
You can bowl, exactly. And they've got coffees there in between. So you're all set throughout. I know that, at least for me, I do the coffees. What is a quote that inspires you? You don't have to get them verbatim, but what's a quote or a saying that inspires you?
There's an Eleanor Roosevelt one that tells you to take ownership of who you are and not let people tell you who you are. Then there are dear friends in Uganda who have a ministry in terms of schools and have helped thousands of people and thousands of kids. And theirs is just always, I'm paraphrasing what Peter and Phoebe say, but it's usually just believe in your purpose. And you'll figure that out. It's already planned, but just believe in your purpose.
Nice. Last question. You are creating it every single day still, but many, many years from now, what do you hope your legacy is with the work that you're doing?
That I left it all on the field.
Well, the final question is the easy one. Where do we go to learn more, to follow your efforts with the Macfarlan Group? So website, social media, where would you direct us to go? Thank
you. First of all, this has just been amazing. Jeremy, you just do so much in this space, and I really do appreciate being on here. It's really fun being interviewed versus interviewing, so I really appreciate that. So just go to the website, themacfarlangroup.com, and there you're going to see the blog 3 a.m. What's keeping you up at night. That's also on Spotify and iTunes. We've got a great new series of leadership. I think there's somebody named Mr. Park actually who's going to be on that particular series. I'm looking forward to that. The blog is really turning in a lot of interest. You can also find that there. And we're also on Facebook, LinkedIn. Every once in a while I'll do Twitter, but I really like Instagram as well. Well, Dr. Deb Macfarlan Enright, you are indeed a change maker. Thank you for all you and your amazing team do. And thank you for coming on the Change Makers podcast. You're the best. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you for listening to the Change Makers podcast, produced by City Current and brought to you by Lipscomb and Pitts Insurance. To learn more about our guests and share your stories of others leading by example, visit us online at citycurrent.com or follow us on social media using @citycurrent. Please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever you listen. Now, think big, start small, and act now. Be a change maker.